In 1798, the United States passed a law to stop protests and to keep things peaceful. On paper, it was about protecting the nation, but within months, newspaper editors were being arrested, citizens were silenced, and the country stood one step away from unraveling. What started as a promise of peace nearly caused a war, and it was all completely legal. Here's how the Alien and Sedition Acts nearly tore America apart from the inside. What would make the government turn on its own people and betray what they fought so hard for just 20 years prior? Foreign policy once again played a major role. In 1778, France and America signed a treaty that would foster trade between the two countries. But over the following 10 years, France became more disorganized, going from a monarchy to a republic that was out to take down every other monarchy in the region. War soon broke out between England and France, and America did not have the finances or the manpower to aid in another war, which is why they declared neutrality. Also, America had their own problems they needed to work out. For example, they were in search of ways to trade with English colonies located in the Caribbean. Before the Revolutionary War, these islands had been key for American trade, but since the war, they had been off limits. In 1794, John Jay negotiated a treaty with England that allowed trade to open up between the two nations. American traders were provided with limited access to the West Indies, and the treaty was mutually beneficial and quite generous. However, France did not take kindly to this deal. They decided that if America would be playing favorites, then it was time for the French to take matters into their own hands. In the span of 9 months, starting in October of 1796, French privateers took over 300 U.S. merchant vessels and their related cargo. America still had an outstanding debt to France, so in retaliation, the U.S. stopped making their payments. This caused tensions to continue to rise between the two countries. In America, support for France's fight for freedom grew, but still, America could do nothing about it. On the political side of things, the most recent election cycle had put the Federalists in charge of the country. The Federalists' core beliefs were that there should be a major authority governing the states and people. Federalist President John Adams believed that in order for the continued support for France to be quieted and for him to be re-elected, laws needed to be in place to keep the American citizens accountable. He feared that without the Alien and Sedition Acts, the American experiment would fail miserably. But fear wasn't the only thing driving this. There was something much deeper and far more personal. This is where lawmaking becomes a risky game, because often you have to toe the line between freedom and safety. The Alien Sedition Acts weren't just protective, they were dangerous. Within the 1798 Alien and Sedition Act, there were 4 laws that went into effect. Firstly is the Naturalization Act. The Naturalization Act extended the length it took for immigrants to become citizens from 5 years to 14 years. This meant that no immigrant could vote or hold office for 14 years. At the time, the reason for this bill was that French and Irish migrants might push America to do things that would benefit their previous countries more than America itself. However, modern historians feel that this act was primarily for keeping immigrants out of the polls, due to the fact that migrants more often voted for Democratic Republicans rather than Federalists. Ultimately, the law was repealed in 1802. The second act was the Alien Friends Act. This act stated that the president had the authority to deport any foreigner that was, quote, dangerous to the peace and safety of the United States. The decision to deport a conspiring migrant would be final, and there could be no appeal. The law was never even fully utilized. A lot of the migrants who were considered to be deported under this law left out of their own free will, and so the law was never needed. It finally sunset in 1800. The Alien Enemies Act was actually a completely bipartisan and not at all controversial law. The Alien Enemies Act made it so that in times of war, the government could detain or deport any male from the opposing country. Later, it was made so that the law applied to everyone, not just males. It has been invoked multiple times in America's history, like in the War of 1812 and in both World Wars. The final act is actually so unconstitutional it should have been a crime. The Sedition Act was passed by a vote of 44 to 41. It said that no false, scandalous, or malicious writings about the US government, whether Congress or president, could be published. This act was mainly to restrict negative thoughts about the Adams administration and the Federalist Party. The protection did not extend to the vice presidency. Only 25 citizens were prosecuted under this law, with 10 of them actually being convicted. Americans were outraged. But after all this political targeting, what happens when the targeted finally fight back? Vice President Jefferson wrote anonymous articles that slammed John Adams as a president. He fought against the Sedition Act, declaring it unconstitutional. Jefferson went so far as to say that the states shouldn't have to obey the federal government if they were unjust, which is a thought not much better than the Sedition Act. Free speech had become a focal point for Americans yet again, and it became a rallying cry for both American citizens and migrants. Jefferson's efforts were not wasted, because in the election of 1800, Jefferson became president and Adams hadn't even been considered to be a serious candidate. The damage had been done, and Adams' reputation was forever tarnished. But even though Adams and the Federalists had lost this battle, it wasn't over. In fact, it planted seeds for something even darker further down the road. Most people think that the Alien and Sedition Acts were just a one-time thing, but we are still feeling the precedent John Adams set. In a sense, it was the first cancel culture, and free speech has never been the same since. And the crazy thing is that it was almost entirely political. But these acts paved the way for the Patriot Act, a controversial act for sure, but it could be argued it was a necessary one. I'm not saying that the Patriot Act was the best solution, but there is often no easy answer when it comes to governing and protecting citizens, especially Americans. When people tell you that you can't say something because it is not politically correct, remind them that we have free speech for a reason. And the reality is that without it, we wouldn't be America, and we wouldn't be the land of the free and the home of the brave. But the crazier thing is that this wasn't even the first time America came close to unraveling. Because in 1780, America almost ended before it began. And it all started with a plot against Washington. Click here to watch that video.